Of course, isopods can't actually teleport from one enclosure to another, but they do sometimes demonstrate an uncanny ability to appear in other isopod enclosures uninvited. Hi, I'm Russ of Aquarimax Pets, and in today's video I'll give you 5 tips for preventing this so-called teleportation. Some of you might ask why you should care if a few isopods happen to show up unexpectedly at a place you didn't plan to house them. Well, if the isopods are different species, this can often mean that the uninvited species will outcompete the other given enough time. This is particularly common with Trichorhina tomentosa, the dwarf white isopod, which is perhaps the most infamous teleporter of all isopod species. If the teleporting isopods appear in a bin of the same species, but a different morph, you have a different concern. The interlopers will bring different genes into the bin, which will generally make it difficult to preserve the desired morph. For example, I love my Armadillidium vulgare magic potion and my Armadillidium vulgare Punta Cana, but if a few Punta Cana end up in my magic potion bin, any resultant offspring from that cross would probably not look anything like magic potions. And because isopods can store sperm for multiple broods and can reproduce long before they reach full size, it might be generations and a lot of tedious sorting before I had a bin of true breeding magic potions again. So those are a couple of reasons why I want to avoid teleportation. Here are my 5 tips for preventing it. Tip number 1. Always make sure to move or remove any leaf stems, twigs, or any other items that lean up high against the sides of the enclosure. These can easily function as ladders and escape routes, particularly if they force the lid to remain ajar in that area. Tip number 2. Keep the interior sides of the enclosure clean and smooth. Dust, fungal spores, other organic material, and even condensation can create a layer on the inner walls of the enclosure. This buildup is much easier for isopods, especially very small young ones, to climb than the smooth, clean plastic. Using a damp cloth or something similar to wipe down the walls of the enclosure periodically will return the plastic to its unscalable state. If you notice that the sides of your bin are rough with scratches, your isopods may be able to climb those scratches as well, so any such bin should be replaced. Before I share 3 more tips to help you keep your isopods from enclosure hopping, I want to thank my patrons at Patreon. You help me create educational content about the creatures that I love, and I'm very grateful to you for that. In addition to the acknowledgments that you see on the screen now, something else I do to show my gratitude is to provide a place on Patreon where you can post questions that I make sure to respond to in my weekly live streams. If you'd like to help support Aquarimax Pets, please click the link that I put at the end of my video or in the description. And now on to tip number 3. Use vent holes that can't be used as escape routes or as entrances. First, let's cover how to stop or discourage isopods from exiting an enclosure from the vents. If you use a plastic vent insert, make sure it is inaccessible to the isopods and or it incorporates a fine mesh of some type that prevents isopods from being able to climb through the vents. These vents from the bug hub can easily be customized to add the mesh you wish to use, and these vents from Hodgepodge Pods come with a fine chew-proof mesh, so both are good options. I'll put links to both in the description. Alternatively, you may choose to drill ventilation holes that are not covered. Such ventilation can work well too, but keep such vent holes small and as high up on the sides of the enclosure as possible to keep isopods from reaching them. Ventilation holes on the cover of an isopod container can serve as entrances. As previously mentioned, tiny young isopods are particularly gifted at climbing a slightly dirty or scratched plastic surface and may make their way out of an enclosure unnoticed. Generally, such escapees will desiccate and die rather quickly unless they find their way into a suitable environment within a short period of time. By stacking multiple bins with open ventilation holes in the covers, you are providing access to just such a suitable environment. By locating all enclosure ventilation on the upper sides of the bin rather than on the top, you can greatly reduce the chances that tiny isopod adventurers will successfully make their way into another bin. Tip number 4. Keep bins of the most accomplished teleporting isopod species separate from the rest, and never above other isopod bins. As I mentioned, dwarf whites are among the most likely to teleport, so I keep mine on a shelf isolated from all other isopods with no other isopods below them. Similarly, my Porcellionides pruinosus are on species-specific shelves. Tip number 5. Don't unknowingly offer hitchhiking isopods a ride. This last one may seem like an unlikely method of isopod transference, but it can happen. Whether it's your hands, decor, feeding dishes, or anything that travels from one bin to another, make sure you aren't inadvertently providing isopod transportation to other bins. You may think that that piece of cork bark looks completely abandoned, but tiny isopods can wedge themselves into minuscule crevices and remain undetected until it's too late. And sometimes, while you're working in your bins, an isopod can crawl up onto your hand completely unnoticed and then just drop off when they get to the next stop. You can probably lift an enclosure lid and drop food into an isopod bin without worrying about cross-contamination, but if your hands are actually in an isopod bin at all for any period of time, it's best practice to wash your hands before putting them in another bin. And don't move decor from one enclosure to another without making quite sure that there is no way that any isopods are still hiding in it. These 5 tips can go a long way towards preventing isopods from showing up in bins where they don't belong. Have you experienced the phenomenon of isopod teleportation? Do you have any more tips to share for preventing it? If so, please let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. I post videos every Friday with live streams on Wednesdays with lots of isopod content. Please rate, share, comment, and if you haven't already,
subscribe.
And then tap the bell for notifications all so you don't miss my next video. And why is it that when isopods do teleport, it's never like this? I think most of us would be pretty delighted if Porcellio expansus decided to show up in a bin once in a while unannounced. Am I right?